Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today, Veterans Day 2021. We are delighted to welcome you to the Stevens During the World Wars webinar. My name is Linda Beninghove, and I am the director of the Samuel C. Williams Library at Stevens. On behalf of my colleagues, we are excited to share with you this webinar, which represents a collaboration between the Library Archives and Special Collections, Stevens Veteran and Military Connected Services, and the Division of Development and Alumni Engagement. We are grateful that so many alumni, students, faculty, staff, and friends are joining us today. And we are honored to share that we have veterans from the past 9 decades joining us in the audience this afternoon. Before we begin, I would like to share a few items to note about our webinar today. The presentation will run approximately 1 hour in length, followed by a 20-minute Q&A and discussion session. The chat and raise hand features are not enabled during this webinar. Attendees may use the Q&A tool to submit questions. Questions will be collected, combined, and posed to our speakers at the end of the presentation. A recording of this webinar will be shared and made available. For Zoom support, please send an email to support@stevens.edu or call 201-380-6599. We would like to thank Dean Deborah Berkeley, Allison McCarthy, Valerie Dumova, and Michael Governor for helping us make this event possible. In a few moments, Dr. Don Lombardi, University Teaching Professor, will share an overview of Stevens Veteran and Military Connected Services. Next, we will be joined by Kristopher Trautz, undergraduate student veteran, who will share with us about the Naval Steam Engineering School and the university during World War I. Then we will hear from Ted Houghtaling, Archivist and Digital Projects Librarian, about our university's third president, Dr. Harvey Davis, the Navy V-12 program, and the role of the Davidson Laboratory during World War II. And last, but certainly not least, we will hear from Leah Loscutoff, Head of Archives and Special Collections, on Women and the War Industries Training Program and Campus Culture During the Wars. Following the presentation, we encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A tool. And now it is my honor to introduce Dr. Nariman Farvardin, President of Stevens, who will share with us some opening remarks. Thank you.
Linda, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I want to thank you and everybody else who has assisted you in organizing this event for all the work that you put into this. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am immensely pleased to be here today to honor Stevens and all United States veterans. To the veterans who are attending this event today, thank you for your service to our country and for all the sacrifices that you've made. As you know, today's lecture will highlight Stevens' contributions to the war efforts during World War I and World War II, and will feature items from the library's archives and special collections, as you just heard from Linda. But you may not realize the full extent of the work Stevens has undertaken in partnership with the US government over the years. Stevens' involvement with wartime military and defense related work goes back over 100 years, and in fact, continues to this day. During World War I, Stevens was selected as the site of the country's first Navy Steam Engineering School, which graduated over 1,800 cadets to serve in the war effort. Beginning in July 1943, and for the next 3 years, the US Navy's V-12 program brought more than 1,200 men to Stevens to study naval engineering. During this time, women also participated in the Stevens War Industries Training School, formed under the direction of the US Office of Education, where they received training in engineering, in drafting, accounting, machine design, and other fields related to industrial production. Much of this history is actually preserved in the library's archives and special collections. And during today's presentation, you will view a number of rarely seen documents and photographs, and also hear oral histories that bring these incredibly seminal moments in Stevens' past to life. Today, Stevens houses 2 national centers of excellence, advanced research facilities selected by the US government to lead national research, development and education efforts to address really crucial global needs. Stevens is enhancing port security and maritime transportation through its Maritime Security Center, sponsored by the Department of Homeland Security, and quite frankly, is revolutionizing our national defense through systems engineering as part of the Systems Engineering Research Center, or SERC for short, which is sponsored by the Department of Defense. Stevens also undertakes extensive research in collaboration with the US military, Department of Defense, and other US agencies through its extensive research laboratories and various government contracts. So I'm very proud of Stevens' historical legacy in supporting US wartime efforts and military research, and I'm also immensely proud of Stevens' commitment to our nation's veterans through the program, services, and support that we provide to the veterans and their family members who undertake their educational studies here at Stevens. I want to thank all our staff members and faculty members who participate in these efforts, and I wish you a lot of luck, and I hope you enjoy the program today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, President Farvardin. We really appreciate that. And now we're going to introduce our video from Dr. Don Lombardi, University Teaching Professor. Thank you.
Well, greetings and salutations from the great Stevens Duck Nation. My name is Dr. Don Lombardi. It's my pleasure to be with you to give you a little class about the Stevens Veterans and Military Office. I have many great jobs here at Stevens. The main one, which is being a professor in the School of Business. I also run the Stevens Healthcare Educational Partnership, but today I'm here in my role as a former Marine, a veteran, and the academic director of the Stevens Veterans and Military Office, and just want to take a couple of minutes and teach a little orientation class about the Stevens Veterans and Military Office, which has now been in existence at Stevens for 13 years. I'd like to start with a quote, some verse. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine and crown success with nobleness and every cause divine. Beautiful words written by Catherine Lee Bates, who was a professor, just like me, at Wellesley College and immortalized by one of the greatest recording artists in the history of the United States, Ray Charles. And I think those words really speak to what we try to do with the Stevens Veterans and Military Office and what all of our veterans are about. Being purposeful in terms of getting their education, being selfless in terms of taking care of each other, taking care of business at Castle Point. And as I speak to you today from Pierce 120 on Castle Point, our beautiful campus, I'm also reminded that there really is a great sense of goodness about what we're trying to do, and really the definition of a leader being someone who takes good people, good resources, and tries to do some good. And that's what we try to do here. We have 6 components of the Stevens Veterans and Military Office. The first, of course, is our Yellow Ribbon and GI Bill program, which affords education to all veterans free of charge using a combination of the GI Bill as well as our Yellow Ribbon program. You see, I drew a couple of vectors to this. Again, love teaching. And this is the TEB, the Transfer Eligibility Program, which also encompasses our Stevens Veterans and Military Office. When you get a COE, Certificate of Eligibility, from the VA, you can not only use those well-earned, well-merited benefits to get your own education, but you could transfer it, transfer eligibility benefits, government acronym, but very effective one that allows your family member, a child usually, or spouse to use your benefits for their education, and particularly at Stevens with the Yellow Ribbon Program. We now have more students, particularly in the undergraduate level, who are transfer eligibility, military and family dependents coming to school than we do actually veterans, which is terrific. It's almost about 50-50, which is a beautiful combination. Also, as part of our Stevens Veterans and Military Office, we have 2 ROTC cadres. We have the Army ROTC, which we share with Seton Hall University. We have a nice cadre there. We also have an Air Force ROTC program, which is at the New Jersey Institute of Technology in Newark. And we've had some wonderful graduates from both of these programs. We have a great cadre with both of these programs, small but mighty, just like my beloved United States Marine Corps, and always positive, always seeking higher ground. And in fact, to talk about higher ground, one of our graduates, John Cherry, actually became a brigadier general in the United States Air Force after coming to Stevens as an ROTC cadet when he was here at Stevens. They're full-time Stevens students. They take their military education at the campus of Seton Hall, the campus of NJIT. Officer programs. If you look at our website, which I encourage you to take a strong look at our website, we have officer prep programs as well as officer graduate programs with GradSco, which is the Army's program, OCS, which is the United States Marine Corps program for preparing officers. And over the past 6 years, we've had 5 of our undergraduates go into the Marine Corps, go to OCS, and become officers. Also the Navy nuclear power officer program. We've had several students from Stevens ascend into those programs. And then the other thing, which is very prominent with the Stevens Veterans Military Office, is we have a lot of community programs. And these community programs encompass the senior design projects at places like the Hoboken American Legion VFW post. They've done a wealth of work there with our friend, the commander of the post, John Carey. We've had a number of students work on, well, I'll show you some of the projects. This is the one I'm most proud of, in fact. And I'll give you some notable facts about the program. The Vets for Warriors program is a program to help discourage of suicides among our veteran population, which the rate thankfully has gone down a little bit. Our students designed all of the technology that's used at that national program. And we're very proud of that. Imagine 5 Stevens students setting up the technology for national network on veteran suicide prevention, which has proved very effective. And Major General Mark Graham can't say enough great things about our students who have jumped in on that. So it's not just veterans, it's our students as a community, a common unity, a common positive unity. We were the first Yellow Ribbon program in the state of New Jersey. Our graduation rate is 98.7. That's why we got those great plaudits recently for the 2nd time from US News and World Report as being one of the best programs in the United States, one of the best universities, Stevens, for veteran and military students. We beat out St. Louis University. I think I know a couple of Marines that went to that school. Drexel, Marquette, Tulane, all right, Mercer, University of Miami in Florida, Illinois, Institute of Technology, Gonzaga, and RIT and Mercer, which are all great schools. But they're gonna have to get used to being in 2nd place, because even though they have full-time staffs that work on veterans solely, we have Dean Deborah Berkeley, who's been with me for the past 13 years working on this program. The 2 of us are fortunate to have a cadre of folks that work on this as a labor of love and as an ancillary duty. So that's very much worth mentioning. We have, by the way, usually about 50 veterans and military dependents a year, which is pretty good. Again, small but mighty, okay? We were the first program, in fact, to have the transfer eligibility benefits of all the programs in New Jersey. Our students, our veteran students particularly, we've had veteran students who have won the Work Study Student of the Year Award. We've had 2 veterans that have won that, as a matter of fact. Internships, scholarships, the I&E scholarship has been awarded to Stevens veterans several times. We've had internships where we've had many students work in one of my other jobs, the Stevens Healthcare Educational Partnership. A lot of our veterans have stepped up and helped us out on that. Two other community programs I'd like to mention quickly, the Heart to Heart program. In the wake of Hurricane Sandy, a team of our veterans helped me take over, you know, in a good way, a warehouse that belonged to the VNA, Visiting Nursing Association in New Jersey, with their help with the Marine Corps veteran, as a matter of fact, that works at the VNA. 72 hours after Sandy hit, we had the warehouse open. We had moved $250,000 worth of goods, uniforms, medical supplies, and all the rest from the Meritus system in Maryland. Military member down there helped make the connection. A veteran helped us that was on the staff at that hospital, moved all the stuff from Maryland to here in 3 tractor trailer trucks, got to City of Asbury Park a little bit back on their feet with the Heart to Heart program. Also, my old Quantico classmate, Major General Lenhart, Mike gave us a call, and our Stevens Solar Decathlon house, which was at a competition in San Diego, then became the California State San Marcos Veterans Center. It's still there, it's actually expanded. And again, that was our Stevens Veterans and Military Office. And, you know, let me tell you about some of the people we've had. We've had 2 All-Americans, both in wrestling. Ryan Bridge, who was a terrific Marine Corps veteran, who was a 2-time All-American. Dylan Van Sickle was both a scholar All-American, as well as a second team national All-American in wrestling, actually was featured on ESPN. Both those gentlemen had GPAs of 3.92, okay? So we've had, by the way, our average GPA for our veterans and our military dependents is pretty high, pretty remarkable. All right, speaking of some great personalities, let me introduce you quickly to some of the great folks that we've had here. Currently, let's start in the present, Lieutenant Molly Prince, in the United States Army, West Point grad, also captain, I don't know if she was captain, she should have been, of the tennis team up there. Dan Beekman, Captain Dan Beekman, is also here right now getting his master's in the School of Business, where I teach both of them. Just had some great compliments on both of them from their professors that they had the highest grades in their very competitive graduate classes during midterms. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Roberson, United States Marine Corps. Mark did his master's here, get this, while he was on active duty in the Marine Corps flying C-130s overseas. Remarkable. Dr. R.J. Pullinan, also United States Marine Corps. He's also a doctor, as you can see, of osteopathic medicine. He's practicing in South Jersey now. Marine Corps combat vet, was a medic, was moved by what he saw there enough to come here, get his degree in biomedical engineering with honors, moved on to the Rowan Cooper School of Medicine, is now practicing in South Jersey. Captain Andrew Lawback, the A-Train, another graduate of West Point, also just finished last semester his master's in construction engineering, while he was a full-time, and still is obviously, a Green Beret, an Army Ranger. One of my favorites, Cadet Cassandra Ball. Cass is the leader of our current Army ROTC cadre. Cass is a great leader, as is Jen Lloyd, who was with her, just graduated last year. Jen ascended to being the de facto leader. Before that, Dylan Van Sickle, who again was an All-American and is now Lieutenant Dylan Van Sickle in the Army. We've had great leadership there. Cass is certainly keeping that tradition going. And if you see these great flags around the Stevens campus, you can thank her for that. We got 2 CEOs as well from this cadre. Justin Williams, United States Navy, former submariner. Kevin Landers, former Marine, in fact, the crew chief for the mechanic crew on Marine One, President Obama's helicopter. Both of them have started their own businesses. Noteworthy is Justin's business, former Navy submariner, great software company that supports healthcare. Kevin's company works closely with the Wall Street community and in that business. And last but not least, I wanted to mention Elsa Blay. Elsa is one of our fabulous transfer of eligibility students. Her dad served with high distinction in the United States Air Force. In fact, her dad is a graduate of the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. And Elsa is a star on our soccer field. She's a star in the classroom as a Pinnacle Scholar, and did a fabulous summer project that identified trends and comparatives for us across the United States, which helped us in our research as we got that great plaudit from US News and World Report. So that's a nice overview. I got to get ready now for my project management class in Pierce 120. I would encourage you to get in touch with me anytime on any questions that you might have. I'm an easy guy to get to. As a former Marine communication officer, I'm on the comm 24/7, so just send an email. And what I'd like to do is mention just one other great student, and that's Chris Trautz, who's with us right now, who's the de facto leader of our current veterans cadre, my fellow former Marine, and the most recent winner of an I&E scholarship, where he put together a fantastic program on the history of Stevens throughout the years. So we've had this 170-year tradition here at Stevens. We intend to keep it moving forward. Anytime is a good time to get in touch. Let us know if you have any questions. Let us know if you'd like to join our effort as we get this mission that we've been celebrating for 171 years here at Stevens. All right. Thanks so much. I know the man upstairs will keep you close to his heart all the time. And forward we go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Trautz. I'm a student veteran here at Stevens, veteran of the United States Marine Corps. I'm very excited and such nervous to be with you all today, talking about Stevens' history during World War I. We can hop right into it. I want to start out with some general context for World War I, just so we can see better where Stevens fell into the general scheme of things. Obviously, conflict started sometime late in 1914, and it wasn't until May of 1917 that we fully became engaged in the conflict. So there was a lot that Stevens wasn't a part of as far as the combat efforts, but there was a ton of lending and delivery of supplies that the United States was a part of leading up to our involvement in the conflict. There was also the sinking of Lusitania with Mary Picton Stevens, who was the granddaughter of Edwin A. Stevens. She unfortunately drowned while on the Lusitania. She was adamant about being involved in aid efforts in Europe. There was also several events in the general area around Hoboken, which were very present in the minds of Stevens' campus at the time. The Black Tom explosion in Jersey City and the Kingsland explosion in Lyndhurst, very close to campus, played into the United States' eventual involvement in the war. You can see the banner at the top of the screen there, Heaven, Hell, or Hoboken. At the beginning of the war, the United States military was only about 140,000 people strong. And then by May of 1917, once the draft was engaged, people started joining more readily. By May of 1918, about 2 million soldiers had passed through Hoboken on their way to the European theater. So Hoboken was very much so a part of the conflict, whether you're looking at the sending of supplies from the docks around Brooklyn or Hoboken out to the European theater, the eventual troops who would go through Hoboken, or just events that happened in the near vicinity. Next slide. Thank you. So you can see when the SATC and SNTC elements, the Student Army Training Corps and Student Navy Training Corps, were introduced on campus in September of 1918. We were well into the conflict by that point. But even still, the students had been involved in some training before that. Soldiers were stationed in Hoboken for about a year before the introduction of these SATC and SNTC elements. And students had actually asked enlisted members of the military who were stationed there in Hoboken to come up to campus and offer training for them so they can be better prepared when their time came. That picture in the lower middle you can see is one of those informal training sessions. These training sessions didn't count for anything towards rank or pay once they actually joined the military. It was totally volunteer and totally just for students to feel ready once their time came. In the top right, you can see the Army element, which had 212 members at its peak. In the bottom right, you can see the Navy element, which had about 244. Both were introduced, and the entire student body had to be enlisted in one or the other, and they had a choice. And eventually more chose the Navy, which I find some joy in. You can see the date for the STEAM Engineering School was introduced in March of 1918, so before these SATC and SNTC elements, which would eventually be ROTC elements as we understand them now. Next slide. So the Naval STEAM Engineering School at Stevens, as President Farvardin introduced it, was a huge success. It was announced in March of 1918. Construction started immediately on some buildings to support it. And by the end of the war, yes, about 1,800 students had gone through. These students weren't Stevens students. The entire enlisted element, part of the SATC and SNTC at the school, were not members of the STEAM Engineering School. Only about 60 Stevens students actually went through the STEAM Engineering School. They were commissioned officers in the Navy who did 1 month of training at Pelham Bay for basic training in the Bronx. Then they would come down to Stevens for 6 weeks of technical training and then spend 6 weeks on a ship doing some hands-on practical work, and then back to Stevens for another month of administrative finishing for that work. You can see at the bottom there, that is one of the battalions at Pelham Bay from the time that Stevens students were going through. They were all brought in. It wasn't distinguished between STEAM engineering candidates or eventual infantry officers. They all went through at the same time. The top right, you can see one of the maps for the Pelham Bay base. And in the center there is Robert Thurston, the first head of the mechanical engineering department at Stevens. I thought it's significant to mention why was Stevens selected as the site for the Naval Steam Engineering School. If you look back at the original curriculum at Stevens, it was shaped mostly by Robert Thurston, first head of the mechanical engineering department, first mechanical engineering laboratory in the country, and he designed the curriculum. Robert Thurston, before his time at Stevens, had been an officer in the Navy during the Civil War, and then taught at the Naval Academy up until the time he was brought into Stevens. So naval tradition was very much so a part of his experience, and when he brought that to the curriculum, some of it paid off. With that, there were other alumni who were significant in having Stevens selected as the site for this school. Admiral Frederick Harris was an alumni of Stevens who was on the Emergency Fleet Corporation, who had selected Hoboken as a port for a lot of the shipping that was done during the war. Next slide. You can see on the bottom right there the Lead building, which was construction began on that in March of 1918, was completed in May of 1918. That housed 300 students from the STEAM Engineering School. On the left-hand side there is the Navy Barracks, which actually was not finished construction until after the school had been closed after the completion of the war. But that was meant to house about 1,100 students. On the top left, you can see students training in the Walker Gymnasium. There were about 100 students for the STEAM Engineering School who slept on cots in there and performed all their training there. So the facilities at Stevens were very much so a part of the STEAM Engineering School. And when you think about the campus climate at the time, all the undergraduate students are in uniform, performing training, ready to go. And with that, there are students of the STEAM Engineering School who have already completed their undergrad work, coming in with more maturity. Have already gone to Pelham Bay for a month of basic training and are now about 1,000 strong at the beginning of the semester, walking around on campus with what is about a 500-person undergraduate population. So the campus had a very different feeling at the time. I imagine a very mature and expectant kind of feel. Next slide. Of course, it wasn't just the student population of the STEAM Engineering School for students during World War I. Faculty were extremely involved in the war effort. Frederick Pryor was the head of the Mechanical Engineering Department prior to the war. He was also a Naval Reserve officer prior to that. So once the STEAM Engineering School was started, he was named the commanding officer of the STEAM Engineering School, and then eventually the commanding officer for the student naval training element. With that, there were professors who were engaged in research. The Mechanical Engineering Lab was doing research on steel plating, which would be used on naval vessels at the time. William Dixie Hoxie, I believe was the name, was a alumni who had built a steam boiler in 1896, which ended up being used on all American and British naval vessels during World War I. This quote by John Lead, a very important alumni in our history, I think reflects the feeling on campus at the time. It was an industrial war. We were concerned with engineering and buildup very much so. And whether it was President Humphreys or the Board of Trustees, there was a feeling that what Stevens brought to the table was not only getting able-bodied men ready for conflict, but was being leaders in industry and engineering so that they could bring the supplies necessary and help us succeed. The painting on the right-hand side was commissioned by Teddy Roosevelt through the official artist of the Navy during World War I, Henry Reuterdahl. I thought it's significant here. It's titled Commerce and Sea Power, meant to reflect the emphasis on industry and naval superiority during World War I. Henry Reuterdahl lived in Weehawken, so he would have been very aware of the feel around campus at the time and the implications of that. Next slide. In the aftermath of our efforts during World War I, we were nationally recognized. This is a letter from then Secretary of the Navy, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, commending Stevens for their work during the war, especially Frederick Pryor, Professor Pryor, who was extremely significant in campus efforts. So, I mean, it's something to be proud of for sure, Stevens' efforts during the time. The STEAM Engineering School, with the amount of students it was putting out, supplied about 40% of the engineering officers for the Navy during World War I. There were about a dozen other schools who had engineering schools similar to ours. But obviously with our 40%, we were performing well above expectations. And this letter is a reflection of those efforts. Next slide. On a bit of a somber note, but something I thought was important to end on here. That quote from President Humphreys at the Great Victory and Peace Dinner Dance, which is a fantastic name from the months following the end of World War I, touched me. And I wanted to share the names of the Stevens students who passed away during World War I. So Stevens had 24 gold stars on their service flag. There were also 739 active duty service members during World War I from Stevens alumni. And that was very significant. So there was a lot to be proud of for Stevens during World War I, whether that was industrial efforts, leaders of industry at the time, or our students' engagement, our students' readiness, or the efforts of alumni in the actual war effort. So yeah, something very much so to be proud of. And with that, I'd like to pass things off to Ted Houghtaling, an archivist with the library.
Great, thanks, Chris. That was really awesome. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Ted Houghtaling. I'm the Archivist and Digital Projects Librarian here at the library. And I'm going to briefly talk to you about Stevens during World War II, using some documents and photographs from the university archives here. So I'll talk about our president at the time, Dr. Harvey Davis, the Navy V-12 program, and the research done at the Davidson Laboratory here on behalf of the war effort. Next slide, please. So researching Stevens in the late 1930s, you sense a palpable anxiety within the student population, especially in the pages of our student newspaper. Each week you would see, each week featured like a variety of student and faculty op-eds talking about the rising international threat growing in Europe and abroad. And the common theme in these articles was not only what America's role would be in this coming conflict, but more specifically, what role would Stevens play as a school of engineering? And, most importantly, what should its students do? So in the spring of 1941, as war is already raging overseas, the commencement address at Stevens was given that year by retired Admiral Harry E. Yarnell, who directly addressed this question, saying that the Navy would need, quote, hundreds and thousands of engineers and people with technical abilities in the coming conflict. If war came, he said, engineering schools like Stevens would play a central role in a successful outcome. Next slide. And in the middle of 1941, war was certainly on the minds of students and other members of the community. Most particularly, it was certainly on the mind of President Harvey N. Davis, Stevens's third president, who had assumed office in 1928 and had already guided the school through one tumultuous event in its history with the Great Depression. And soon enough, he would have yet another challenge to face with America's entry into World War II. And as we all know, war did finally come on December 7th, 1941, with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And a mere day after the attack, President Davis addressed the student body in the pages of Astute, which you can see here on the right. And I'm not going to read the speech in full, but I think it's worth hearing just the first few sentences as it really summarizes what course Davis would chart for Stevens in the coming years. So he begins with, quote, "War is here. This war will be fought even more crucially in the factories of America than on any battlefield or far-flung area of naval activity. The 17 men behind every man behind a gun must do their parts, not only loyally, but vigorously and effectively, if he is to have a fair chance to do his self-sacrificing part well." Next slide, please. And in the ensuing months, Davis certainly wasn't idle in driving home this point to everybody from government officials, business leaders across the country, Stevens alumni, really anybody that would listen. And that point is that the success of the war would hinge on centering production, industrial efficiency, mobilizing resources, and most importantly, valuing the contributions of trained engineers as being just as important as combat soldiers serving on the front line. And pretty quickly, Davis became an outspoken leader on this topic, writing and delivering multiple speeches in print and on the radio, talking about the duty of engineering colleges and how they can best serve the war effort. And he estimated that there were only 300,000 engineering graduates in the United States at that time, 1941, and that the number should be twice as many. So President Davis wanted to do something about it and wanted Stevens to play a central role in that endeavor. One initiative was the creation of the War Industries Training School, which Leah is going to talk about in her presentation. And another was an accelerated program started in 1942, where Stevens shifted to a trimester schedule with 3 terms, each lasting 16 weeks. The program was designed to supplement the depleted engineering staffs of war industries in the tri-state area, and required that each Stevens student spend 1 term working in a factory or a plant on a rotating basis to keep a steady flow of production in those industries. And as a result of the success with these initiatives in late 1942, President Davis is tapped by the War Production Board in Washington to serve as the director of the newly created Office of Production Research and Development. The goal of this new office was to, quote, ensure rapid appraisal and prompt and effective use of new processes, materials, mechanisms, and inventions in the production of war goods. So Davis was the perfect fit for this job. He soon takes a leave of absence from Stevens and spends most of his time between DC and London, collaborating with his allied peers until resuming his office at Stevens in late 1944. After the war, in recognition of his efforts, Davis is elected as an honorary member of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers in the United Kingdom. Interestingly, he was only the 4th American given this honor, the others being Henry Ford, Orville Wright, and Professor A.G. Christie of Johns Hopkins. So President Davis is going to come up later in the presentation, but I just wanted to give him his proper due. A really significant and fascinating figure, and his work during World War II is just one aspect of his administration. So definitely someone you can devote a whole lecture to. Next slide, please. And now we'll talk about probably the most well-known initiative at Stevens during the war, and that's the V-12 Navy College Training Program. So to give a little background, after the US declared war in December 1941, there was a record number of people who were either drafted or signed up to serve in the military. And as a result, many colleges and universities around the country saw a drastic drop in their enrollment rates. And many were worried that they would just have to close their doors during the war because they just wouldn't have enough students to make ends meet. So to address these fears, the American Council on Education issued a report in October 1942 that recommended the creation of a college training corps to kind of serve as a bridge between these colleges and the military. It would use the faculty and facilities of selected schools around the country and provide technical training for students before becoming commissioned officers. So President Roosevelt announced the creation of 2 new programs. There was the Army Specialized Training Program and the V-12 Navy College Training Program. And in part due to our track record with the government, in the previous war, like Chris already mentioned, and the success of President Davis's initiatives in the previous years, Stevens was selected as one of 131 schools across the country to host a V-12 program. And the V-12 program served 2 main purposes. One, like I said, it allowed colleges and universities to remain open during the war, with the steady flow of students coming in whose education was subsidized by the government. And 2, to provide an accelerated 1-year technical training program for the Navy Reserve to supplement the active service commissioned officers that were already coming out of the Naval Academy in Annapolis. There was another component of the program for the Marine Corps, but for aspiring naval officers, the V-12 was the first step before entering the V-7 program, which was the US Navy Reserve Shipment School, and that's where they would finally be commissioned as ensigns in the Navy Reserve. And as the war progressed, many of these graduates were immediately pushed into active service upon graduating as the war ratcheted up. Next slide, please. When the program commenced in July 1943, most V-12 students were either high schoolers or college first years from all over the country. And when they initially applied to the program, they would have to undergo a physical examination. They would also have to take a rigorous academic test to assess their knowledge and their abilities before being admitted. And then the Navy would place them at one of the 131 V-12 schools around the country. So students were coming to our program at Stevens from all over the place, all over the country. The initial class at Stevens had a total of 513 students, with 217 who were already enlisted in the Naval Reserve. Attendees were exempt from the draft and basically received a government subsidized education. Graduates did not receive the traditional mechanical engineer degree from Stevens, but instead received a Bachelor of Science degree. Our yearbook, The Link, described the scene on opening day in July, as you can see here in the photos, with a procession of bright-eyed students, some fresh out of high school, marching down River Street and assembling for instruction and registration at the college auditorium in Edwin A. Stevens Hall. And this is where they received their Navy uniforms, their course list, the room assignment, before being officially confirmed as a V-12er and commencing their studies. Next slide. The commanding officer of the V-12 unit at Stevens was Lieutenant Robert E. Boyles from the U.S. Navy Reserve. And coursework-wise, the curriculum was dictated by the Bureau of Naval Personnel, but Stevens was allowed to keep its core faculty on the payroll. So the latter handled a lot of the engineering, math, and science instruction, while Navy personnel handled the military drills, the physical training, and other Navy-specific instruction. Much like the accelerated program from the previous year, students were enrolled in 3 school terms, which lasted 4 months each. Unlike the Army program, V-12 students were allowed to attend classes with civilians, as well as join the Stevens fraternities, student groups, and athletic teams, which Leah is going to talk about in her portion. And within a matter of days, the campus was transformed and started to look and sound much like it had during World War I. Since V-12 students were actively enrolled in the Navy, they had to wear their uniforms at all times on campus when they were outside of their dorms, and adhere to a strict schedule during the day, as you can see in the image on the middle. The link describes a campus bright with the white uniforms of apprentice seamen and the khaki garb and gold braid of the commissioned officers amidst the sounds of marching drums, bugles, and shouted commands echoing across the campus, which I love that little sensory detail. Next slide, please. And all total, between when the program started in July 1943 and June 30th, 1946, when the program ended, more than 125,000 men throughout the United States attended classes at a V-12 program. And at Stevens, there were quite a few future leaders in industry who attended here. There was Joseph Anderer, future president of Revlon, Erd Malik, who became vice president of US Steel, and there was Thomas Alshaus, who would become a rear admiral in the Navy. So pretty illustrious group of people. And as the war started to come to a close in 1944, 1945, the Navy decided to shift its training program to the Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps in November 1944. And the V-12 unit at Stevens was reduced from around 500 students to 308. And after 1944, all students would come directly from the fleet for additional training, not from high schools or colleges anymore. After the war ended, many of these V-12 graduates returned to their schools to get their official undergraduate degrees. So in the ensuing years, with the help of the GI Bill, there was a significant post-war boom in enrollment here that saw the historic increase to the student population at Stevens. This was instrumental in reversing the school's course from the previous decade, where it was still reeling from budget deficits and other issues left over from the Depression, and helped set up the research and building boom for Stevens that would come later on in the late 1940s and 1950s. So a large part of that is due to the V-12 program. Next slide, please. And I'll finish here with a brief overview of the Davidson Laboratory and its contribution to the war effort during World War II. So there were a lot of research programs and laboratories at Stevens that contributed to the successful outcome of the war. There was the Laboratory of Psychological Studies. There was the Powder Metallurgy Laboratory, Stevens Sound Research Program. The list goes on. But one of the more well-known is the experimental towing tank, now known as the Davidson Laboratory. And today, the lab is a renowned maritime engineering research lab, but has a pretty humble origin in the early 1930s. Its creator, Dr. Kenneth Davidson, the guy on the left, was an associate professor of mechanical engineering here and started to use the old swimming pool in the basement of the Walker Gym to test and evaluate scale model ships to see how they behaved in simulated marine weather conditions. And at the time, there were only 2 facilities in the United States to test and evaluate scale models in this fashion. So pretty soon, Davidson's research at Stevens starts to draw the attention of certain commercial and government interests who begin to help fund the creation of a larger state-of-the-art facility in 1935, which was dubbed the Experimental Towing Tank. And that facility is the precursor to the Davidson Lab that we know today. The photo on the right comes from that iteration of the lab, and you can see our friend President Davis surveying the new facility, the guy on the right, when it opened with Professor Davidson in the center. Next slide. And even before America's entry in the war, the experimental towing tank was already heavily funded and used by the US Navy to study the performance of vessel hulls and seaplane designs and other types of marine research. Flash forward to 1942, and more reports are starting to come in of German U-boat attacks on merchant and allied vessels in the Atlantic. So the US government cites the need for a specialized facility dedicated to the study of ship maneuvering to evade enemy attacks. Professor Davidson, who already had connections with the Navy, submits a proposal to the National Defense Research Committee, directed by Vannevar Bush. And in it, he proposes the construction of a maneuvering basin to be built on Hudson Street at the western edge of the Stevens campus, which is where the Davidson Lab is situated today. The proposal is approved, and construction begins on towing tank number 2, which measured 75 feet wide with a breadth of 75 feet. And it was at the time the largest facility in the United States dedicated to this type of research. So this new maneuvering basin is completed in 1942. And the following year in 1943, the government funds the construction of another even larger tank, which would take up 2 city blocks on Hudson Street between 6th and 8th, adjacent to where the second towing tank was built. Towing tank number 3 was completed in November 1944 and was dedicated to the testing of seaplane hulls and high-speed craft. And it was huge. I mean, you could see here at the bottom left. It measured 300 feet long by 12 feet and could test models up to 60 feet per second in a variety of conditions, like simulated conditions like ice flows, turbulent sea storms, and even shallow rocky waterways. Next slide. And from 1942 until the end of the war, all 3 of these tanks are almost exclusively being used by the Navy under the supervision of Professor Davidson. As you can see in the chart on the right, in 1945, the lab had logged over 600 hours in the span of 1 month, which means it was running tests at an average of 20 hours a day. So it was just a constant flow of testing for the war effort. And the staff was expanding rapidly to meet this demand. Davidson formed a relationship with Bryn Mawr College outside of Philadelphia, along with the War Industries Training School right here on campus, to recruit women to serve in key roles as ship model designers and data analysts, which you can see in the photos here on the left. And by 1943, the staff had grown to 63, and nearly 1/3 of that number were women. Near the end of the war in 1944, about half of the lab's work was focused on seaplane design, with the other half devoted to testing a variety of hybrid designs like amphibious vehicles that saw action in the Pacific and on D-Day, as well as Army pontoon bridges, which were used in Europe in the final years of the war. All total, the combined output of this research center, the Davidson Lab, was pretty astounding. 1940 to 1945, they tested models for 21 different amphibious vehicles, 121 flying boats, 81 destroyers, 11 cruisers, 31 different merchant cargo vessels, 28 tankers, and 29 other experimental designs for the Army and the Navy. After Davidson's death in 1958, the experimental towing tank is rededicated as the Davidson Laboratory in 1959. The laboratory continued its partnership with the US government and helped develop the first modern submarine, the USS Albacore, in the 1950s, and even went on to work with NASA in the 1960s for testing the splashdown behavior of the Apollo lunar module, as well as the lunar rover in the lab's new soil tank in the 1970s and 1980s. But that's a story for another lecture. Now I want to turn it over to Leah, who's going to talk about women, the War Industries Training Program, and how campus culture changed during both wars. So thanks very much, everyone. Really appreciate you coming out, and see you in the Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Ted, for the great presentation. And also thank you to Dr. Lombardi and Chris for their great presentations. So I wanted to briefly talk about the women that were admitted to Stevens during World War II. So in both the World Wars, women played supportive roles to help the war effort. This support was often represented by women filling the many vacated jobs that men left to serve overseas. Women also served on the front lines, but mostly as nurses, ambulance drivers, and translators. During the Second World War, though, women started to receive more targeted mechanical training and played a big role in helping support the defense industry. Women entered Stevens at some capacity during the 1940s due to the war effort. In 1941, President Harvey Davis gave a speech which foreshadowed the entrance of women to Stevens during this time period. In this speech, he stated, in continuing special defense training, we are confronted by a condition, not a theory. Positions have so attracted boys that there is no longer a reservoir of them available to be trained in such pre-employment courses as have been given in our defense industry school. It is not clear whether applications will be sufficient to warrant continuance of the school along present lines. We may have to redefine our whole defense training program. The War Industries Training Program was first established at Stevens in 1940, formerly called the Stevens Defense Industries Training School. And by the spring semester of 1942, women were enrolled in the program. When women were first admitted in 1942, there were 39 women in a full-time capacity and 28 were part-time students. During the war years, the school offered 150 daytime and evening courses. And at one time, there was a total enrollment of 5,000 students in the War Industries Training Program, with a large portion of the enrollees being female. The women admitted had previous training in mathematics, physics, and chemistry. And President Davis created an advisory committee of women active in college administration. Dr. Lillian Gilbreth was on this committee. She was a well-known psychologist and an industrial engineer. She was also the first female engineer in the US to receive a PhD. She and her husband, Frank Gilbreth, were efficiency experts and were well known for their time motion studies, which they happened to work on with Stevens alumnus, Frederick Winslow Taylor. Women in the War Industries Training School at Stevens were set up to succeed in multiple ways. First, they learned technical terminology. When women first started, it was identified that technical terms used by engineers were unfamiliar to most women in the program. So a glossary of shop operations was prepared to help close that gap of knowledge. Second, the female classmates were furnished with mechanical models, which they could operate in the classroom for further knowledge of mechanisms that they might not have been exposed to yet. And providing that further visualization was helpful in understanding the mechanics of machinery. In general, Professor John Weigel, who was involved in training women in the War Industries Training School, described his female students as neat, precise, and careful. Next slide, please. Most of the women admitted to Stevens during the 1940s attended the accelerated technical program that was offered, but many others were able to obtain advanced degrees in science during this period, when the rules changed due to the war circumstances of war. Thankfully, Dr. Beatrice Hicks was one of these women. Hicks received a master's degree from Stevens in 1949, and prior to that was the first woman to earn a bachelor's degree in engineering from Newark College, now called NJIT. I had to cut this photo to the right down for this presentation, but it's a great photo from Stevens Alumni Weekend in 1952. Beatrice Hicks was invited as a guest speaker for this luncheon. At this time in 1952, Beatrice Hicks was the president of the Society of Women Engineers, which was first established in 1950, just 2 years prior. Ms. Hicks is sitting here next to the new Stevens president, Dr. Jess Davis, who started in 1951, in the middle of a long table and appears to be the only woman at this event, although I can't verify that for sure. Next slide, please. So campus culture during World War I and World War II, just to briefly kind of build upon what Ted and Chris have already discussed. As we learned from the previous great presentations, Stevens provided a lot of support and played an important role on the home front in supporting the war efforts in both world wars. In 1917, there was the marching of student battalions coming through the old 6th Street gate. The US Navy Steam Engineering School and a large Army and Navy presence on campus in general. And during World War II, the commands and marching of the B-12 Naval Unit dominated Castle Point. During the war years, campus culture would need to change. Sacrifices would be made, curriculum would be altered, creating a unified home front to support a burgeoning class of soldiers and veterans. Both world wars made a big impact on the Stevens campus and impacted the culture and students greatly. Being in World War II much longer, that war had an even larger impact. The US entered World War I in the spring of 1917, and the war ended in the fall of 1918. The US fought in World War II for close to 4 years. Many student traditions and athletics were on hold on the Stevens campus during the World Wars, although even more was halted during World War II. Prior to the US Navy Steam Engineering School being implemented at Stevens in 1918, Stevens formed the Alumni Committee on Military and Naval Affairs in 1917. There were also many campaigns to support the war efforts, such as buying war bonds, and the Stevens Library even campaigned for books for soldiers and sailors heading overseas. In a 1940 Stevens Indicator article, it was noted that 1,583 Stevens men, including alumni, served in World War I. In fact, amongst the number of US naval officers that came from college programs during World War I, 38% were from Stevens. See, next slide, please. There was a new ruling that was already mentioned earlier in 1918 that required all college students passing the national requirement for fitness and ability to go on a condensed 2-year course of study without vacations and serve in a student Army training corps, which also had a Navy section, or be eligible for the draft. This program didn't last long though, and it was terminated by the end of the war, which was on November 11th, 1918. So exactly 103 years ago today. It actually caused some disorder on campus since the undergraduate program suddenly lengthened from the condensed version. This change in campus environment is recorded in the Link yearbook. by the class of 1922, who would have been first-year students at the end of the war. So the write-up in the link goes on to state, we entered Stevens in the latter part of September under the most unusual condition brought about by the war. After a few days of inactivity, those of us who were within the limits of the draft age were enlisted in the Army section of the Student Army Training Corps or in the Naval Unit to help in the great struggle. Our experiences in our 2 months of service in the Student Army Training Corps were many and varied, mostly pleasant, and our ability to use the vernacular in our education and things military and naval were considerably increased. When the signing of the armistice was followed by the order for the demobilization of the Student Army Training Corps, there was joy among our classmates. We looked forward with anticipation to the Christmas holidays and the resumption of normal college life with its athletics and class rushes. So here are some images from the Link yearbook. The Link and the Astute were pretty good at documenting the men that were on active duty and overseas at the time. Also, most events during this time period would have a military presence. Even the alumni night would include a military drill from Stevens students, as you can see from that flyer. Next slide, please. So Alexander Calder was also a student at Stevens during this time period, during World War I, and he talked a little bit about it in his autobiography published in 1966. Calder joined the Naval Reserve at Stevens in the fall of 1918. Before joining the Naval Reserve, though, in the summer of 1916, he participated in the civilian military training camp in Plattsburgh, New York. In his autobiography, Calder writes, "A year later, in the spring of 1917, we entered the war and military training was decreed for Stevens. All people with experience were asked to step forward. I did so, and I was made guide of the battalion. That's the guy that walks out front. As I had a way of arching my back, throwing my chest and belly forward, I soon got nicknamed the man of 400 degrees. I also just recently saw this candid shot of Calder in the Link yearbook. I actually think we have a lot more than we realize in terms of images of Calder because he was very social while he was at Stevens. We just need to look a little more closely. Next slide, please. All right. As Ted mentioned earlier, the V12 program started at Stevens in 1943. And although it might have seemed like the V12 program completely engulfed student life during the war years, there were still about 225 to 290 civilian students on campus each term during World War II. The Stevens community played their part, but tried to maintain some sense of normalcy on the home front as well. Naval trainees were also encouraged to participate in all aspects of college life, and extracurricular activities were supported. With a larger Navy presence on campus and with the formation of the V12 program at Stevens, the Navy would often participate with campus activities as encouraged. For example, the newly formed Stevens Yacht Club would often race the Navy on the Hudson River. I'm guessing that the Navy probably won those races. The academic year of 1942 to 1943 still remains slightly unchanged, with sports and student activities intact, but at a limited capacity. After that academic year, sports became more restricted. Intercollegiate varsity sports were temporarily suspended, and there were only interclass teams that mainly consisted of first-year students. For the most part, interclass soccer and softball were more consistently played during the war years. And the fencing team at Stevens was completely suspended due to the lack of equipment available. Although the Astute newspaper kept up a regular production, the Link yearbook was not published in 1946 due to the war effort. I also thought that was the case for the 1943 Link yearbook, but according to Astute articles, it looks like the 1943 Link yearbook was published, but on a limited basis at that time. And that publication was described as a more informal and humorous version of the yearbook. because of that limited supply, a copy never made it to the archives. So if anyone out there happens to have a copy of the 1943 Link yearbook and would be interested in donating it or would allow us to scan that issue for our records, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm very curious to see it. Also, the president's opening address that usually occurred at the beginning of the fall semester every year was halted between 1943 to 1946 due to the World War. There was also a new grading system that was established for B-12 trainees that were not getting a Stevens degree, which was not a requirement for the program, as Ted was mentioning before. The faculty and administration had ruled that a grade of M as in Mary be given to students who work towards satisfying the Navy requirements that were not candidates for a Stevens degree. So here are some more candid shots of Stevens campus and students during World War II. And next slide, please. So most student organizations would postpone or halt activities, and in general, the Stevens community became a unified front to make the necessary sacrifices for the war effort. War rationing was also in full effect, and food essentials, gasoline, rubber, and metal materials were the most treasured at this time. Stevens participated in contributing to a scrap metal drive in the fall semester of 1942, and even acquired 15 tons of scrap metal from around campus. All scrap metals were in demand during the war since the defense industry in the US was revved up. There was also an alumni war fund that was started at Stevens to help support Stevens alumni that were overseas with their needs, campus blood drives, and campaigns to purchase war bonds. Many of the usual student traditions were halted during the war years, and freshman hazing traditions that were always laid out in the freshman handbook given to all new first-year students were put on hold when the B-12 program was established. The freshman handbook that was normally printed annually by the Stevens chapter of Pi Delta Epsilon fraternity was temporarily replaced by a 4-page newsletter called Campus Life. In the fall of 1943, this newsletter mainly listed and explained campus organizations that were available for student participation at the time. And it also encouraged students to participate in extracurricular activities. Some of those traditions that were on hold during this time and excluded from the usual freshman handbook include first years identifying themselves by wearing a dink hat, wearing a white name card of stiff cardboard with their name on it, and wearing one white and one black sock, one sneaker and one shoe, and to keep your pant legs up, so rolled up so that your socks could be clearly visible. I just wanted to use this photo because, as you can see, Michael Delafonte from the class of 1963 perfectly represents those exact traditions, which would have been halted during the war years. After the war, the Stevens Student Council in 1945 decided to not have any hazing on campus due to the fact that almost the entire class coming in was composed of veterans. In fact, veterans were excluded from all hazing together, but were still expected to learn the freshman handbook. All right, next slide, please. So you can see from these photos from Alumni Day in 1946 that there is a large military and veteran presence. I also want to note, and I think Ted mentioned this too, that the new enrollments after the war, were just so large, and especially not even just in the undergraduate program, the graduate program, which almost entirely consisted of veterans. So that was after the war. Next slide, please. There are a lot of Stevens alumni that were World War II veterans. And some of those individuals are still nearby and remember their time at Stevens and in the B12 program. John Dalton, Stevens class of 1960, was able to capture some of those memories when the Tales from Castle Stevens film was created. And members of the Stevens class of 1945, Charlie Eisenhart, Ed Pitaluga, and Ed Whitke shared some of their memories. We're not playing that clip here right now, but I just wanted to alert you to it so you could watch it at home for yourselves, and which is also available on YouTube and also the virtual history page on the library website. Many of you listening also might know Mr. Joe Schneider, who was from the Stevens class of 1946 and was also a part of the B12 program at Stevens and went overseas during the last part of World War II, and he was stationed in the Pacific. And I wanted to share a brief clip of this great memory of Joe's that we recorded recently for the archives, thanks to Michael Governor. Also, I have another oral history I recently did with Bill Caldwell, class of 1943. And that clip will be up on the Voices from Castle Stevens page, project page, which the URL is linked right over there. So we hope to record more oral histories with veterans for this project. So if you know of someone that would be interested, please reach out to me. But for now, let's please hear from Joe.
What made you want to enlist?
What made me? Well, the draft was coming, and I wanted to go in the Navy. I didn't want to be drafted into the Army.
Okay,
so I went to the Brooklyn Navy Yard and I signed up.
Oh, okay.
And luckily, at that time, they were just starting with the V12. So that's how I wanted to Stevens.
Yeah.
Yeah. I go over the list, and then they sent me down there, Stevens. Yeah, we used to march around up at the upper field and the lower field. We ran around a track early in the morning.
Okay.
We had a lot of exercise down there, yeah.
Did you?
I was in Palmer Hall, by the way.
Oh, I was going to ask you that.
Palmer Hall, yeah.
Yeah.
I always pass it when I'm down there. I had on the north end, the last room, if you're going down, the last room in the corner on the second floor as you go down past it when you're leaving. Yeah.
Do you remember who your roommate was?
Staley.
Oh.
Staley was his last name. Rudy Staley.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Rudy Staley. Yeah, he was my roommate. Yeah, he had the upper bunk. I had the lower. We had double bunks in the room. Yeah. And we had good times up there. We had a lot of laughs.
What were some of
We
your?
used to have pie night. We used to go around hit a guy in the face with a pie. All go to bed and get out in the hall. Didn't know who the hell hit him. You had to do something stupid. And you know what we did also? We'd be on the second floor by that window when they came down. They always ate at the castle, and we wait for them. And when they came near the window, we throw a bucket of water around them. You had to do. These are engineers. You had to do something stupid, right? Yeah, those are two damn things I remember. We had a good time there.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, Palmer Hall.
How was living on a ship with a lot of Navy men?
It was very, very good.
Do you have memories of that?
Yeah, it was
good camaraderie.
It was
I
good.
guess?
We got along very well. I enjoyed the Navy. I really did. Yeah, I really did. It was good. Well, from going to Stevens, I became an ensign. And when you're an officer on a ship, you always have your own room. You have everything. And we had a lot of liberty. I got through all the Pacific. Went all over in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it. Yeah. Had some rough water sometimes, but sometimes the ocean is pretty calm. Yeah. But there's a lot of water out there.
Yeah.
That ocean, that Pacific is big. Yeah. You only realize it when you're out there. For days and days you'll be out there, don't see nothing, no land or nothing.
Wow.
Then all of a sudden you'll see an island, It's a big body of water. Yeah. Of course today the ships go a lot faster, but in those days it was slow moving, But I had it was an interesting life, I'll tell you.
Great. Almost running out of time, I just realized. So want to thank everyone for the collaboration with this great event to honor our Stevens veterans. For all the veterans out there listening right now, thank you so much for your service. We appreciate you. Thank you to the Veteran and Military Connected Services Office and also the Development and Alumni Engagement Office. So let's open it up for Q&A for the last 5 minutes.
Okay, great. So we have one question. Leah, you can hear me, right? I just want to make sure you can hear me. Okay, great. Okay, I'm wearing my headphones now because the library is hopping today. So I just wanted to ask this question on behalf of one of our attendees. Until when was military time in use at Stevens?
I mean, I would probably think till, I mean, if we're talking World War II, when the V-12 program ended in June 30th, 1946. I can't confirm that, but that's my educated guess.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ted. I appreciate that. At this time, if there are additional questions, we would love to hear from you using the Q&A tool at the bottom of the screen. Okay, great. Here's another question. When did the dedicated AFROTC program at Stevens end?
I could. Sorry, I could speak on that a little bit. It began in 1949, I believe, with the Charles Lamont branch, Charles Lamont branch of the Arnold Air Force Society. Charles Lamont was a Stevens grad who was killed in action, I believe, in World War II. And it continued until the 80s sometime. 78, somebody just answered that. Perfect. But it was kind of worked in, thanks, John. It was kind of worked in collaboration with NJIT, as far as I could tell, because they still carry a branch of Air Force ROTC cadets with Stevens.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristopher. At this time, please feel free to use the Q&A to ask us additional questions. We are happy to answer them live here. Okay, great. We have another question. I heard that the space capsule flotation collar for returning splashdowns was invented at Stevens. Is this true?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one again?
Sure, no problem. I heard that the space capsule flotation collar for returning splashdowns was invented at Stevens. Is that true?
I don't know if it was invented at Stevens, but I mean, I can confirm in our records that they did do some splashdown testing, and I think in the maneuvering basin, which was towing tank number 2 at the Davidson lab for the Apollo program. But I don't know if, because the Davidson lab wasn't at that time wasn't really inventing anything, but was mostly like acting in like a consultation role and providing facilities for the testing of other organizations' design. So primarily Navy, NASA, you know, and other organizations. But I do know that the Davidson lab like has their own library, and Leah and I are always like itching to get our hands on it and to kind of like take the time to go through their documents. So somewhere in their archives, in their library, I mean, they may have, you know, verifiable proof. So I would recommend getting in touch with them even.
Great, thank you so much, Ted. I look forward to hearing what you do find there as well. Additional questions? We have a few more minutes we can take to answer any questions you might have.
While we wait, I'll just quickly mention the link at the bottom for the library archives and special collections. We have a lot of digitized materials there. I mean, we have thousands of manuscripts, photographs, oral histories, things of that nature. So if you click that link and you want to know more about, you know, the things we talked about today and other things like that, definitely explore what we have available. I mean, literally thousands of items that you don't need to make an appointment to see in person, although that is also available to you if you want to take a deeper dive into Stevens history.
That's right. We do invite you to contact Leah and Ted if you have any questions, and if you'd like to make an appointment to do some research in the archives, they would be happy to assist you with that. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, I don't see any additional questions coming in through the Q&A. I guess we can wrap up our time together today. Are there any additional comments from our presenters today? Okay,
Linda?
yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah, Linda, Chris, just tell them about the website. Yep, okay. Thank you. Yeah, just as you can see, contact us, any questions, suggestions, any help. We're always there for you, Veteran and Military Connected Services, and the link is right there. As Ted mentioned, you got it for the library, and you got it for our office as well. And thanks to everybody for putting this together. It's great.
Great, and I think we have one more question. I used to read the Naval Institute proceedings in the library. This is a comment. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. And we'd be happy to make a research appointment with you if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing in the archives these days as well. We have another question. Were V12 grads commissioned? Were V12 grads commissioned?
Yeah, it was kind of like a first step towards, I believe it was the V5 program. And that was the Navy Midshipman School. And I think when you graduated from V12, it's like where you received your technical training. Then you would go over to the V5 program. And I think there were only 2 or 3 schools in the country that offered that. But once you graduated from the V5 program, then you would be commissioned as an ensign in the Naval Reserve. But like I said, like around 1944, 1945, like people were graduating from the midshipman school and they just were immediately activated for active service, serving abroad or domestically.
Thank you, Ted. Okay, all right, with that, I think that we have finished our Q&A session. Thank you so much to everyone who was here to join us today. We really appreciate that. We look forward to posting this recording on the library website in the Archives and Special Collections section, and we'll be sharing it out as well. Thank you so much to everyone who helped make today possible. We wish you a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Please keep in touch. Take care.